Tokyo, May 1942. Humid air pooled in the embassy corridors, the lacquered floors faintly sticky under leather soles, the smell of ink and hot dust hanging beneath the sluggish sweep of electric fans. In a side office of the German embassy, a wireless intercept, 5-digit groups in neat blocks, was carried in on onion skin paper. A cipher clerk read and reread the groups with an unease he could not place. This was not a German hand, not a diplomatic circuit. It was Japanese naval traffic, JN-25B by the look of it, and the fragments that yielded under machine and pencil hinted at an American presence inside a code the Axis trusted. A note passed up the chain recorded, the shock with restraint. The Americans appeared to know an objective designated AF. No one in the room could say why a target label inside Japan's combined fleet planning lexicon seemed to glow with American attention. But the implication raised the hairs on the neck. Someone was listening who should not have been. By mid-May 1942, thousands of miles east, the lights burned in the basement of Pearl Harbor's Station HYPO as Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort, in his rumpled jacket and slippers, traced patterns across a blotter. HYPO's handful of officers and yeomen had been hammering at JN-25 for months, rebuilding super-encipherment tables by hand, turning scraps into cents. The phrase kept surfacing in the traffic, AF, tied to fuel allotments, water details, and a timetable converging on early June. Rochefort pushed his pencil hard enough to tear the paper and wrote the line he could defend. They're heading for AF. In his mind, AF was Midway, the hinge of the Central Pacific, the atoll whose airfield length and water report matched everything in the decrypts. If HYPO was right, the Imperial Navy's carrier striking force, Akagi, Kaga, Sōryū, Hiryū under Nagumo, was steering for a decisive ambush they believed secret under Operation MI. The task now was to prove that AF truly meant Midway, and to do it fast enough that the fleet could set its own trap. The morning of December 8, 1941, dawned over a Pacific ruled by Japan. Smoke still curled above Pearl Harbor's wreckage, the twisted hulls of the Arizona and Oklahoma, bleeding oil across the harbor's surface, a black mirror for the rising sun. In Tokyo, newspapers thundered of divine victory, of how, in less than 2 hours, Japan's carrier force had destroyed what generations of American admirals had called the Pacific's shield. 8 battleships lay sunk or crippled. 2,403 Americans were dead, and the heart of U.S. naval power seemed silenced. The Imperial Japanese Navy, flush with confidence, pressed outward in every direction. Within weeks, the rising sun flew over Guam, Wake Island, and Hong Kong. The British bastion of Singapore fell in February 1942, its garrison of 80,000 surrendering in humiliation. In the Philippines, General MacArthur's men fought and starved on Bataan until April, when the Japanese swept them aside. Oil, tin, and rubber from the Dutch East Indies now flowed into Japan's war machine. From Tokyo to Truk, the Pacific seemed an Axis lake. Observers marveled at the precision of Japan's offensives. Airstrikes and fleet movements unfolded with clockwork harmony, converging across thousands of miles of ocean. Allied commanders, bewildered, asked how their enemy coordinated such perfect timing. The answer pulsed invisibly through the ether. Streams of 5-digit numbers, the Imperial Navy's new JN-25B cipher. It was layered, elegant, and seemingly impregnable, a fortress of mathematics guarding every convoy, every submarine patrol, every attack plan. American intelligence intercepted countless signals yet could read none. Their fleets moved blind while Japan struck with uncanny foresight. But in the charred shadow of Pearl Harbor, inside a cluttered basement of the 14th Naval District building, Commander Joseph Rochefort and his small band of linguists and mathematicians refused to yield. To them, no code was perfect, and even the strongest cipher could bleed if pressed hard enough. Their quiet war against JN-25 had begun. Beneath the sun-bleached courtyards of Pearl Harbor's 14th Naval District, a door marked only Communication Intelligence Unit Restricted led into another world. The air was heavy with machine heat and tobacco haze. Racks of radio intercepts lined the walls like veins, feeding a living organism of paper and wire. This was Station HYPO, the heart of America's secret war beneath the Pacific. Inside, typewriters clattered in uneven rhythm. Fans hummed against the Hawaiian humidity, and messages arrived faster than hands could process them. The operators were young, linguists, mathematicians, and waves recruits from across the country, each trained to see order in chaos. At the center of it all stood Commander Joseph Rochefort, a man as brilliant as he was unconventional. He often worked barefoot, wrapped in a red smoking jacket over his uniform, his hair perpetually unkempt. But those who served under him knew there was no one alive who understood the Japanese mind or its language better. Rochefort's fascination with Japan had begun long before the war. In the 1920s, he studied samurai writings by candlelight, mastering the nuances of honorifics and military phrasing that now filled the enemy's coded messages. The JN-25B system he faced was a marvel of cryptographic engineering. More than 45,000 base code groups, each further obscured by a constantly changing numeric additive. To most it was unreadable gibberish, but to Rochefort, every intercept was a living thing, its heartbeat hidden within frequency counts and recurring patterns. His analysts built wooden index trays filled with handwritten code groups, reconstructing fragments of meaning, one digit at a time. They began spotting words that carried weight: Kido Butai, task force; Hoku, movement; Suiron, refueling; and, most ominously, AF. Through February and March of 1942, HYPO's log sheets grew thick with activity. Traffic from Japan's combined fleet headquarters at Kura spiked sharply, its rhythm suggesting something vast in motion. Analysts marked the pattern in red pencil, a build-up too large to be another island raid. Each clue whispered the same conclusion. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, was assembling a decisive blow meant to crush the American fleet once and for all. And somewhere within that storm of numbers lay the key to stopping him. JN-25B was not a code in the simple sense. It was an armored labyrinth of mathematics and discipline. Each message the Imperial Japanese Navy sent into the air arrived in streams of 5-digit groups, stripped of context and meaning. Beneath those numbers lay two locked layers, a base code book of some 45,000 entries, and an additional numerical additive, chosen at random from pages of secret tables that changed every few weeks. To read even a single phrase, one had to first guess the additive that masked it, then map the exposed digits back to their original word. It was a fortress built by cryptographers who believed no human mind could climb its walls. Yet in the dim, fan-cooled rooms of Station HYPO, minds tried anyway. Banks of early IBM punch-card machines rattled like mechanical insects, sorting endless permutations of number sequences. Each card represented one fragment of possibility: a weather phrase, a convoy report, a logistic code word. Analysts like Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes and Lieutenant Joseph Finnegan spent nights cross-checking patterns, hunting for additivities that had been carelessly reused. When two messages shared the same masking number, meaning bled through. Sometimes it was just a hint: refuel, attack date, or AF, but Rochefort taught his men to treat every clue as a live wire. By mid-May 1942, the partial decrypts painted a growing picture. Carriers and transports were being assembled for an operation whose objective remained F. Meteorological dispatches from AF multiplied inexplicably, requests for temperature, humidity, and water production reports. Rochefort's instinct told him what logic could not prove: AF was Midway. But Washington's Office of Naval Intelligence refused to act on instinct. Proof was required, so Rochefort proposed a gambit, as daring as any naval maneuver. Midway would send an uncoded message reporting its desalination plant had broken down. If the next Japanese intercept mentioned that AF was short on water, the secret would be out. The ocean itself would confirm the truth. May 20th, 1942, the air above Midway Atoll shimmered with heat as radio operators in the U.S. garrison tapped out a message that was never meant to be secret. It was a deliberate lie, written in plain English, sent for the enemy's ears. "Midway's water distillation plant is out of order," it read. "Need fresh water urgently." The message drifted across the Pacific like bait on a long line. 2 days later, in the basement of Station HYPO, a young analyst burst through the haze of cigarette smoke clutching a decrypt. The latest JN-25B intercept contained a chilling line: AF is short of water. The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then Rochefort, calm as ever, scrawled a simple note across his pad, proof at last. AF was Midway. The trap could now be set. Once AF had a name, the rest of the puzzle fell into place. Fragments that had seemed abstract now formed a coherent battle plan. The intercepted Japanese messages outlined the precise structure of Operation MI, a diversion toward the Aleutians, a main assault on Midway itself, and the presence of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto aboard the super battleship Yamato, orchestrating from the rear. Leading the strike were 4 carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Sōryū, and Hiryū, veterans of the Pearl Harbor attack, carrying over 250 aircraft and escorted by cruisers, destroyers, and transports. Their goal was not merely to seize an island. It was to annihilate what they believed remained of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. But while the Imperial Japanese Navy sailed under the illusion of perfect secrecy, their enemy already knew their schedule, strength, and direction. The ocean's vastness no longer favored them. Rochefort's single note, AF is Midway, had turned code-breaking into strategy, mathematics into warfare. The Americans now held the unseen advantage. The hunters were about to become the hunted. By early May 1942, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto believed he was ready to finish the work begun at Pearl Harbor. His new operation, codenamed MI, was audacious, intricate, and steeped in deception. The plan called for the largest concentration of Japanese naval power ever assembled. More than 160 warships stretched across the Pacific, from the icy Aleutians to the equatorial seas near Midway. At its core stood the Yamato, the 72,000-ton flagship bristling with 18-inch guns, a floating citadel from which Yamamoto would orchestrate his masterpiece. His 4 frontline carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Sōryū, and Hiryū, formed the striking arm, carrying 248 aircraft and the same elite pilots who had crushed Pearl Harbor and swept across Asia. Operation MI was designed to unfold like a symphony of destruction. First, a northern task force would attack the Aleutian Islands, luring whatever American ships remained toward Alaska. Then, as U.S. forces rushed north, the main Japanese fleet would descend upon Midway, AF, to annihilate the Pacific Fleet once and for all. Yamamoto envisioned his carriers striking at dawn, his battleships finishing any survivors by dusk, and Japan emerging as undisputed master of the Pacific. Every element of the plan relied upon surprise. The Japanese believed that their JN-25B code, rewritten only months earlier, was unbreakable. Their communications flowed freely, orders for refueling at sea, flight plans, and precise attack schedules, all transmitted across circuits that Station HYPO was quietly monitoring. Rochefort's team now read enough of the traffic to predict the exact timing of the assault, June 4, 1942. As the Japanese toasted their coming victory aboard steel decks glinting under the sun, American codebreakers had already delivered their findings to Admiral Chester Nimitz. The U.S. carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown were already at sea, moving to intercept an enemy that still believed the Pacific was theirs. Dawn broke on June 4, 1942, over a calm Pacific that belied the violence to come. The sea was a mirror of molten silver, the horizon streaked with low cloud. Aboard the Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, Sōryū, and Hiryū, crews moved with practiced precision as Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's strike force advanced from the northwest toward Midway Atoll. At 4:30 a.m., the first wave, 108 aircraft, a mix of Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers, Aichi D-3A dive bombers, and Mitsubishi Zeros, rose from their decks in disciplined columns, engines growling against the dawn. By 5:30, Midway's radar picked them up. Many planes heading southeast, distance 93 miles. The alarm clanged through the island's bunkers. Sirens wailed. Marine pilots sprinted to their cockpits. Minutes later, the sky over Midway erupted. Japanese bombs tore into fuel tanks, hangars, and barracks, igniting pillars of fire. Anti-aircraft guns thundered from sandbagged emplacements, throwing black bursts into the path of the attackers. Marine aviators, flying outdated Brewster F-2A Buffaloes and Grumman Wildcats, climbed into impossible odds. Many never returned. By the raid's end, half of Midway's fighters were gone. Yet the defenders had inflicted enough damage to unsettle Nagumo's staff. Reports of American aircraft still taking off led him to prepare a second strike to finish the job. His hangar decks bustled with activity, armorers swapping torpedoes for land bombs, fuel lines snaking across metal floors. But Nagumo did not know that his own fleet was already being hunted. Northeast of Midway, the U.S. carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown waited in perfect ambush, guided there by Rochefort's decrypts. At 7:10 a.m., the first American torpedo squadrons, flying obsolete TBD Devastators, appeared on the horizon, attacking without fighter cover. One after another, they were torn apart by Zeros and anti-aircraft fire. Entire squadrons vanished into the sea. Yet their doomed courage drew the Japanese fighters down to wave-top level, leaving the sky above unguarded. At 10:22 a.m., American dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown arrived overhead. In 6 blistering minutes, 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Sōryū, were engulfed in fireballs that turned the Pacific sky black. By mid-afternoon on June 4, 1942, the once invincible First Air Fleet was dying on the open sea. The Akagi, Kaga, and Sōryū burned from bow to stern, their decks split and sagging, aviation fuel feeding infernos that no crew could quench. Pilots stumbled across smoke-choked passageways. Sailors leapt into oil-slicked water as secondary explosions rippled through the wrecks. The ocean itself seemed to burn. From the remaining carrier Hiryū, Vice Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi refused to concede defeat. Rallying what few aircraft he could, he launched 2 retaliatory waves that afternoon. Dive bombers from Hiryū found the Yorktown and struck hard. 2 bombs and a torpedo tearing through her decks, leaving her listing and silent. For a brief moment, it seemed Japan might yet balance the scales, but the Americans had already located their last hunter. At 5 p.m., squadrons from Enterprise and Hornet, guided by radio bearings and sharp-eyed scouts, closed in on Hiryū. The Japanese carrier was refueling aircraft when the first dauntless dive bombers broke through the clouds. Bombs struck her flight deck in rapid succession, one near the island, another amidships, the third detonating below in the hangar where torpedoes and gasoline lay exposed. Fire engulfed her within minutes. Survivors described a single blinding flash as the ship's heart erupted, flames clawing hundreds of feet into the sky. By nightfall, Hiryū too was abandoned to the sea. When word reached Admiral Yamamoto aboard the Yamato, he stared in stunned silence. 4 carriers, his fleet's striking arm, the pride of Japan's Navy, were gone, along with 250 aircraft and the irreplaceable pilots who had once shattered Pearl Harbor. The most powerful naval force ever assembled had been annihilated in a single day, all because of a code, a handful of men in a basement, and a note that revealed a secret too great to keep. The Pacific balance had shifted forever. In Berlin, the first whispers of Japan's disaster arrived cloaked in disbelief. A terse diplomatic cable, stripped of detail, hinted that the Imperial Navy had suffered losses near Midway. When fuller reports followed, 4 carriers sunk, hundreds of aircraft lost. Admiral Karl Dönitz dismissed them as Allied fabrication. To the German Naval High Command, it was unthinkable. Only 6 months earlier, Japan had crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet in a single morning. How could the Americans have reversed their fortunes so completely? Analysts at the Oberkommando der Marine scoured every intelligence channel for clarification. Then came the confirmation. Intercepted Japanese messages, authenticated by the Foreign Ministry, admitted the loss of Akagi, Kaga, Sōryū, and Hiryū. What began as rumor hardened into fact. Inside Germany's cryptographic branch, the B-Dienst, silence fell. Its mathematicians, who had struggled for years to pierce British naval codes, were astonished that American cryptanalysts had unraveled Japan's JN-25B, a cipher considered even more intricate than the German naval enigma. In dark offices lit by flickering lamps, the realization spread that no code might be truly secure. Officers began to question whether the Allies could also read Axis traffic. Dönitz ordered renewed safeguards for U-boat communications, insisting that Enigma remained inviolable. None of them knew that British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had already been reading Enigma for nearly 2 years. In Tokyo, the truth was buried under layers of censorship. Newspapers spoke of temporary setbacks, and photographs of the lost carriers were banned. Admiral Yamamoto ordered the immediate issue of new codebooks, JN-25C, but it was too late. The psychological wound was deeper than the material loss. Japan's aura of invincibility had been shattered by invisible adversaries armed not with fleets or guns, but with logic, patience, and the art of listening. The triumph at Midway had been won not only on the sea, but in rooms filled with hum and clatter, rather than smoke and fire. Across America, from Pearl Harbor's Station HYPO to Washington's OP-20G headquarters, a new kind of industry was taking shape, an industry of information. Rows of mathematicians, linguists, and engineers sat not at assembly lines, but at long wooden tables stacked with intercepts and punch cards. Their tools were pencils, tabulators, and logic. Each IBM punch card machine, whirring and clicking like a mechanical heartbeat, could sort thousands of 5-digit code groups every minute. The numbers pouring from these machines were not abstractions. They were the raw material of war, as decisive as steel or oil. By late 1942, the United States had transformed cryptanalysis into mass production. Code-breaking centers processed more than 20,000 intercepted messages every week, cross-referencing patterns through early computational systems and hand-built statistical charts. Success came not through brute force, but through inference, detecting rhythm, repetition, and human error inside the seemingly perfect architecture of enemy ciphers. Collaboration linked stations across oceans, HYPO in Pearl Harbor, CAST in the Philippines, and Frumel in Melbourne, each feeding discoveries to the next through secure naval circuits. The result was a global web of intelligence that reached from Manila to Washington. Rochefort's single note, AF is Midway, had proven that information could sink ships as surely as torpedoes. The Navy took that lesson to heart. Funds and manpower poured into machine-assisted cryptanalysis, refining statistical methods that would dominate the rest of the war. What began in a cluttered basement under Pearl Harbor had grown into a national intelligence engine, an unseen factory producing clarity from chaos. In its circuits and wires lay the beginnings of what the modern world would one day call signals intelligence. Victory, when it came, carried no parade for Joseph Rochefort or the men of Station HYPO. In the aftermath of Midway, their cramped basement fell silent, its maps and intercept logs already yellowing in the tropical air. Washington had celebrated the battle as a triumph of naval command and courage, but few in the capital cared to mention the cryptanalysts who had made it possible. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner and OP-20G Chief John Redman dismissed Rochefort's work as speculation, a lucky coincidence, rather than the result of systematic code-breaking. They argued that Midway had been won through intuition, not intelligence. By late 1942, Rochefort was quietly relieved of his post and reassigned to a shipyard inspection role far from the war he had helped shape. His team was scattered across the Pacific. The note that had rewritten history now lay buried in official files, unacknowledged. For the Japanese sailors who went down with the Akagi and Kaga, the architects of their destruction, remained faceless. They died believing their plans had been betrayed by fate, not mathematics. Few would ever know that their doom had been sealed by a man in slippers, working beneath Pearl Harbor's concrete floors. Across the Axis world, disbelief turned to unease. German and Japanese intelligence officers began to question whether any cipher was safe. The invisible war, of minds instead of guns, of patience instead of aggression, had exacted its own toll. Rochefort's quiet genius had saved thousands of American lives, yet cost him his career. In the long silence after Midway, he bore the weight of victory alone. Only decades later would history restore his name, recognizing him as the man who proved that in modern war, the sharpest weapon was understanding. The Battle of Midway ended Japan's expansion and began a new era of warfare. In the months that followed, the Imperial Navy retreated step by step across the Pacific, its carrier corps crippled beyond recovery. Yet the battle's truest legacy was not written on the sea but in the language of intelligence. The organization that Rochefort had built beneath Pearl Harbor became the blueprint for a new kind of military power, one rooted in information rather than armament. The network of stations that had shared decrypts across oceans evolved into a permanent intelligence architecture. After the war, those same methods, collaboration, cross-checking, and statistical pattern analysis, were institutionalized within the Navy's Communication Intelligence Organization and, Eventually, the National Security Agency. The lesson of Midway was immortal. Strength alone could not guarantee victory. Knowledge, the ability to see before striking, had become the decisive weapon. A single intercepted message, analyzed with discipline and intuition, could alter the trajectory of nations. The doctrine of warfare itself changed, giving rise to a world where computers, not cruisers, would one day determine dominance. Japan rebuilt its codes in the years after defeat, but the aura of invulnerability surrounding JN-25 was gone forever. 4 decades later, in 1986, the U.S. Navy formally corrected its oversight. Joseph Rochefort was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for his role in breaking the code that turned the tide of the Pacific War. His handwritten note, AF is short of water, had proven more powerful than any torpedo, more decisive than any battleship's broadside. It was a reminder carved into history. In modern conflict, the most potent weapon is not firepower but foresight, and the minds willing to uncover it.